years, Boston's Seaport district was ugly and unloved, a virtual wasteland of parking lots and shabby industrial buildings. But those vast acres of underused space also presented Boston with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the chance to build a brand new neighborhood from scratch, right at the harbor's edge. But as the Seaport district takes shape, some fear the development now underway is falling short. WGBH News reporter Stephanie Leiden has our Focus report.
To get a sense of how fast the Seaport is changing, just try to count all the cranes. Buildings are going up fast, many of them sleek glass towers. And on the sidewalk level, developers promise more of the same. Stretching from the Moakley Courthouse to the Convention Center, the Seaport is 1,000 acres. So the question, does what's being built reflect the potential of this huge neighborhood, an area dubbed the Innovation District?
I would not say this is the most creative architecture. If you look all around here, I think as we talk about the 21st century, the waterfront really can be much more.
Vivian Lee is the head of the nonprofit Boston Harbor Association. For decades, she's kept careful watch on Seaport development plans.
You know, you see beautiful drawings done by architects, and then you see it in reality, and it's like, is this what we really signed off on?
The concern that in a city known for its distinct and diverse architecture, think Back Bay or Beacon Hill, what's being built here in the Seaport is generic, something that could be found anywhere in the country.
If you think about other waterfront cities, they do some things that are fun.
Lee cites Sydney's famous Opera House and, closer to home, the giant arch at Rose Wharf.
We need a signature building down here?
It should be something like that. Otherwise, what you have are just rectangular glass buildings.
But glass buildings provide something people want, expansive water views. This is the view from the 15th floor of the office of developer Joe Fallon.
Right now we have 2 buildings under construction and we have 3 buildings that are up.
Fallon is developing Fan Pier, a 9-block stretch in the Seaport named for the train tracks that once fanned out to meet cargo ships. Today, it's home to life sciences giant Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Fallon is building another tower for the law firm Goodwin Procter.
The city itself has actually asked us, and we continue to look at adding glass or adding a modern feeling to the design.
He says that modern feel fits this neighborhood where the vibe is young and the emerging mix of restaurants, retail, and residents appeals to people looking for a 24/7 lifestyle.
Is there going to be something about it that will distinguish it from other cities, that will give it a unique, iconic look?
Yeah, the designs that we've been employing, we brought in a number of different architects, and the designs that we've been working with have a different feel.
One of the biggest design challenges in the Seaport comes from overhead. Planes heading to and from Logan Airport fly so low in this area that the Federal Aviation Administration has restricted building heights.
And that's a real challenge for architects. I mean, you know, you've got these demands that are placed by tenants that they want a certain amount of square footage on a floor, and the buildings can only be so high, so it makes these buildings that are fairly blocky.
Architect David Hassin believes the success of the Seaport will depend on how inviting it feels to pedestrians. His own contribution? District Hall, a public gathering space with a cafe spilling out into the street.
It satisfies that interest that I have in making sure that the ground plane of the district is really active and engaging.
He also likes a Seaport development called Liberty Wharf, where restaurant patios connect to a public dock.
It's very popular. It's very engaging. People are really, there are a lot of restaurants and people want to be near the water, and it feels very good that way. Other buildings in the district aren't as friendly.
He worries sheer glass walls will create barriers in a neighborhood meant to foster collaboration. But with so much yet to be built, critics also hold out hope.
Every time I see a parking lot, I say, there's a chance that we're going to get something a little bit different, a little bit more creative.
There's time and space. For an old city, it's a big opportunity to create something new and distinctive.
Over the years, there have been a number of plans for Seaport development. One of the most creative came from Anthony Athanas, who owned the famous Anthony's Pier 4. He wanted to create a system of canals, kind of a Venice on the waterfront.
Yeah, that would be very cool.
He hired an architect, had the environmental permits. Problem was he did not have the money. In the end, it wasn't feasible. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Land is expensive in Boston, and the bottom line always comes into play.
A couple of big new apartment complexes going up. how many people actually live in that area right now?
A fair number do. I don't have the exact number. Joe Fallon's building two beautiful waterfront condominiums. There have been apartments there for quite a while. So there's life down there. And Vertex brought in about 1,800 jobs. Yeah, so the life is beginning for sure.
Stephanie, thank you so much for that. All right, so what will it take to turn the Seaport into one of Boston's best neighborhoods? Karo Shen is the Director of Planning at the Boston Redevelopment Authority and is responsible for community planning and urban design. Welcome, Karos, to Greater Boston.
Thank you.
So is this a fair criticism, that it's just one big mass of glass tall buildings and it's kind of generic and there's nothing really special?
Well, I think there are plenty of special buildings already. I think that criticism is valid if you look at the buildings as individual objects. I think that there's a lot of potential when you start to think about the district as a whole and what the public realm and what the streets and avenues and connection to the water can be like. So I think that there are certain parts of the waterfront that are emerging as real places. The Liberty Wharf area is not because of the building, but it's because of the parks, how it relates to the fish pier. And I think that when you start to see these as aggregates of multiple buildings, as precincts, then I think we're on the right track.
I mean, but there's still an area, I mean, I still feel like you got to drive from place to place there. If you're over where Marina Drive is, Strega and that whole area, you're not going to just get out in the street and start walking. And I mean, is there, and this is all private development too, it's not like the city has, is there some way you can impose a will on developers and say, you make this more of a community?
I think that developers are already complaining that we're imposing too much of our will. But I think the point you're making is a good one, that the public and the city is responsible for the streets and the connective tissue. So right now, these buildings are actually not really connected.
No,
the streets have not emerged. And I think the open space is beginning to emerge, but we need to tie it all together. So again, if you think about this 1,000 acres, it's bigger than the Shawmut Peninsula. And that when you think about the range of buildings and the quality of architecture in the traditional downtown, you begin to say, well, there's good and there's bad. I don't think that this district have an inordinate number of bad buildings. I just think that they haven't been, the context is just still emerging. So, and it doesn't have history. That's the other thing.
Not yet, right. All right, well, let's bring George Thrush into the discussion. He's the director of the School of Architecture at Northeastern University, where he studies the connection between transportation, urban design, and civic image. So what do you think of Vivian's suggestion that we have a signature kind of building that's, I don't know about the Sydney Opera House, that might be a bit dramatic, but something like the Zakim Bridge, something that's just, it's there, it's in that neighborhood.
It's interesting, but I think there's actually some signature buildings there already, as Kairos was suggesting. Well, very distinct buildings like the Convention Center, the ICA, and the courthouse. What there isn't yet, and what exists in more historical parts of the city, is the connective tissue that gives them prominence. When you come up by water to this area in 5 years, you'll see the ICA as this portal, and then you'll see some buildings of common height nearby. I think then the streets and the avenues and the connective tissue that Kairos was talking about will have more meaning because you'll be able to perceive them. Right now, it's all kind of like a map before stuff gets put there. And it's easy to, I agree. I mostly go to that area by car.
Of course. How else are you going to
either
get there?
My own or by Uber or something like that. But once the buildings are there and you're looking at street corners instead of just across the tops of parked cars, I do think it will be very different.
But even the roads, and you can jump in on this too, Karos, I feel like I'm on a highway. It's not a road. It's not Newbury Street. It's not Boylston Street. It's a highway. And if I'm going to go jump from one hotel to the other, I'm not going to walk on that road.
But there is a reason for that, and the reason is that we built the Seaport District on top of very large-scale infrastructure from the Big Dig, for the Ted Williams Tunnel and all that. And that's very different from the way we built other neighborhoods. I don't disagree at all that the streets are definitely wider and more difficult to cross in the South Boston Seaport District than they are in the Back Bay or certainly in the North End. But I think the scale, that infrastructural scale, is a result of these big moves that we made, and it's kind of hard to avoid that. And the modern development, the parcels there, the actual building sites are much bigger than they are in the traditional city.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. That's a good thing.
I think that's, I mean, George is right. The dynamics and the emergence of this area and the block sizes are really dictated by the highway. And I've often said that this is city making in the 21st century, which is there is no budget to fund actually building cities. We had to be creative and leverage building a city out of a highway funding. And that's how actually the Rose Kennedy Greenway emerged. We created a park on top of a highway. So now we're trying to create something that is really has the kind of Boston character.
Giant footbridge. I'm trying to get creative.
Well, but the notion of trying to create Boston character out of an infrastructure kind of funding and power dynamic. So in a way, the planners perhaps lost out compared to the civil engineers when we were building out this place. But I think there is potential because the streets that you mentioned that are impossible to walk on, today we're designing and redesigning it, so reassigning that dimension for pedestrians, for bikes, and for other kinds of transportation modes that's going to tame this area and then create the kind of landscape, if you will, that will connect all these buildings together. And then you won't be looking so much at the buildings themselves. You'd be saying, oh, I'm not so far from the water.
On the other hand, George, what's wrong with sort of leaving it the way it is? Maybe it never will become like a real serious living neighborhood. I mean, are they going to have grocery stores? Are they going to make? I mean, it's a destination for restaurants and for work.
Right.
Maybe that's good enough. I mean,
well, no, I suspect that it will at least have some of the elements of a neighborhood. I'm sure that it will have some kind of grocery store. Now, if this is a politically combative issue, I'm unaware of it right now.
Well, there's one now.
But it, sure, the reason there'll be a grocery store eventually is there'll be enough demand for enough grocery buyers there to warrant it. What is really interesting, I think, down there is there is a new building right on the edge of the Seaport District, 315A Street, which a lot of people think, wow, now there's a handsome building. Why aren't they building all the other ones like that? It's because the scale of 315A Street is on the old 19th century plots of the edge of Fort Point, whereas these new parcels are on these really big ones. And it's just a different creature. It's not to say it can't be nice, but it is to say it's a different thing. And I'm glad that they're not trying to model it on 19th century Boston, because that really wouldn't work, I think.
Well, I've been complaining about this for 20 years, so I'll have another 20 to complain about it, I think. All right. Kara Shen, thanks so much for coming, and George Thrush. Appreciate it.